There still is a lot of work to be done. They say well begun is half done. India began very well. The scale of everything. I mean, can you imagine more than 200 meetings in 60 cities across every state of our country, and so many different strands to take it forward. But yet, whether it's the Sherpas or the leaders, they're burning the midnight oil. They will work through the day tomorrow to ensure that there is a Delhi declaration. Niggles remain. The West is very clear on a mention of Ukraine, and that has been discussed at length. Amitabh Kant, India's Sherpa, he mentioned that extensively, that leaders said whether this war in Ukraine, it's actually impacting growth and economic development, because food, fuel and fertilizer prices have been impacted. So what are the problems that remain? Can they still be overcome? We bring you this report.
Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. One earth, one family, one future. This is the mantra that will guide Prime Minister Narendra Modi as he chairs the G20 summit, a gathering of world's top leaders in New Delhi. Prime Minister Modi on Friday posted on X that the group will seek to accelerate progress of Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. Green Development Pact for a Sustainable Future, and strengthen multilateral institutions. Modi stretched on the importance of technological transformation and digital public infrastructure. The G20 will also work to further gender equality and women empowerment and ensure world peace. The Delhi Declaration, the G20 joint statement, is still a work in progress. Russia's war in Ukraine and climate change remain the sticking points. The Western nations are pushing for a mention of Russia's actions in Ukraine, while the Russians and Chinese are blocking it.
G20 is an economic forum. It discusses issues of growth and development. However, last year in Bali, there was a feeling that issues of conflict and war have an impact on growth and development.
New Delhi has played down concerns that China, which is represented by its Premier Li Qiang, will play a spoiler, given its strained ties with India.
China is a multilateral player. In multilateral discussions, the issues are very different from bilateral issues. The challenge about any multilateral discussion is that you have to bring consensus across every issue. Every country has a veto power, and therefore we have to bring everybody on board.
The consensus building efforts will now be led by the heads of state.
We would rather focus on what are the priorities in the G20, of the G20 countries. Our belief is that multilateralism needs to be reinvigorated, it needs to be inclusive, and it also needs to be an important center and a medium for global governance.
India, under Prime Minister Modi, reshaped the G20 by giving the Global South voice on the high table. The African Union, a group of 55 African nations, is all set to get representation in G20. With Geeta Mohan in New Delhi, Bureau Report, India Today.
This very clearly is India's moment. And as the countdown begins for the G20 Leaders Summit, I now want to get you a message. I want to get you the thoughts of Mr. Arun Purie, the India Today Group Chairman and our Editor-in-Chief.
India's big G20 moment has arrived, with New Delhi as the host city for the global elite. From being an aspirant knocking on the door, India is now at the high table. But what is most striking about India's year-long presidency of G20 is how creative its agenda setting has been and how bustling its execution. No other host country has put so much action into the frame. Almost 200 events across 60 plus venues, brilliantly showcasing India to many who matter. Nor has any country extracted so much from the forum in terms of achieved objectives. Under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's chairmanship, India has proceeded in two broad directions. The first pertains to the relation between the event and the people. It was earlier a talking shop restricted to heads of state, their top-level aides, retinues of diplomats, finance experts and assorted technocrats. The outside world was, well, outside. Modi's accomplishment has been to alter that aspect fundamentally. Take the digital public infrastructure theme India has built into the G20 framework, getting the UNDP and the World Bank to adopt it as an accelerator of sustainable development goals formally. Beyond the jargon, what he's doing is addressing the genuine concerns of the world. Another instance of this is the expert group on finance set up by India in March, co-convened by the very experienced NK Singh. Its focus is to get multilateral development banks to relook at the lending terms offered to poorer countries. A vital step during the present global debt crisis that can touch billions of lives worldwide. Secondly, India has not stopped at just doing this by power of attorney. We have proposed that the African Union be invited as a permanent member, and New Delhi will host an AU representative for the first time at a G20 summit. De facto, therefore, it is already G20+1. Only the formal renaming is awaited. This immediately opens out a hitherto rarefied realm to a continent that has been at the wrong end of history for centuries. Nothing encapsulates India's championship of the cause of the Global South more emphatically than this one step. India has woven that theme into the G20 agenda at all levels, from financial inclusions via MDBs and digital empowerment via DPIs to making climate change negotiations fair to the Global South. But India's G20 vision is not the only reason we have chosen to focus this week's cover story on the New Delhi summit. It is being held at a time when the world is deeply divided and troubled. The COVID-19 shock on economies has seen global indebtedness soar. Russia's invasion of Ukraine spiked global inflation to crisis levels, coupled with food shortages. Meanwhile, China has been moving aggressively, hoping to establish itself as the world's next superpower, challenging America's global hegemony. India has felt the heat directly, with China engineering the worst border confrontation in over 50 years. India had to conduct its G20 presidency amid such exacerbated schisms. This became clearly visible at the New Delhi summit with the conspicuous absence of both Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. This isn't the first time the Chinese and Russian presidents have missed a G20 event. Xi didn't attend Rome in 2021 due to COVID restrictions, and an isolated Putin stayed away from Bali in 2022. But Xi's last-minute pullout is a thinly veiled attempt to belittle India at the precise hour of its glory. It is only the latest in a series of signs that show bilateral ties at a nadir. Witness China's formal refusal to move on a border settlement as a precondition to everything else. It also recently released a map showing Arunachal Pradesh and Aksai Chin as part of China, and forced India to accede to a BRICS expansion. In the past, such hostile Chinese maneuvers saw New Delhi moving closer to Washington bilaterally and via anti-China groupings such as the Quad.